express my appreciation to all of you for committing 2 days to this process. It's not easy for some people to find that time, and for officers as well for committing 2 days to this. And obviously that's on top of what you and elected members do on the other days to get us to this position as well. But before we start, there are proceedings I need to bring your attention to. There's no expected fire alarm testing today, and therefore, if the fire alarm does sound, please follow the fire emergency procedures that are applicable to this council house. These sessions will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of subsequent repeated viewing. By entering the Warspite room, committee members are consenting to being filmed throughout the meeting and to the use of those recordings for webcasting. And can I ask that you speak clearly and directly into your microphone so that online participants and people at the meeting and the public can hear. And that is switched off when it's switched off when you're not using it. And also your mobile phones, as demonstrated here, need to be turned off to silent. Okay. Are there any apologies, please?
Through you, Chair, apologies from Councillor Holloway, and Councillor Freeman is joining us for 2 days.
Okay. And Councillor Mark Lowry sends his apologies as well for this morning. He has a family commitment he has to deal with. Any declarations of interest that show up on the work that we're about to discuss? If there's nothing at this moment, but if there's something that crops up during our discussion and questioning, please declare that if it's relevant at that time. I've got no urgent business, but in terms of what we're intended to do today, the Cabinet has noted a budget that's been put together for the municipal year 25 to 26. And it can be changed in light of, and I'm sure David Northey will say this, in the final settlement, because there will be adjustments based on this provisional budget. Our role is to discuss the budget, ask questions about how what's been allocated is going to deliver the city's priorities for the sake of our people here, particularly those where there's pressing need and pressures. And then we make recommendations from this committee to the Cabinet, and then the Cabinet then will look at those recommendations and further develop the final budget with officer advice, naturally, in order to present it to the full council in February. Before we start the first session, because we're waiting for a few people to arrive, it might be useful to, no, I won't say that at the minute. What we will do, there will be recommendations made from our discussion for the Cabinet discuss at the end of each section of our 2 days. So there are 5 sections. And then at the end of tomorrow, we'll collate those and draft the wording that we will present to the Cabinet to consider. Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. As we're going along, can we actually say recommendations rather than waiting? So if I'm asking a question, can I make a recommendation on that question from an answer that has been given?
Absolutely.
That okay? Is that okay?
Yeah. So it's a mixture of questioning, discussion, clarifying, and as a result of that, then please suggest a recommendation. Thank you.
Through you, Chair. So I'm more than happy to take recommendations as they appear. But as Chair said, I think it's best we collate those across the 2 days and then make the confirmation tomorrow afternoon, if that's all right, Councillor.
It would help as well when we're referring to officers and Cabinet members to give a page reference as well for the information that you're seeking clarification on, rather than wading through the document. They'll be wading anyway, but it's helpful if there's a number. For each section, there'll be a presentation by a Cabinet member, supported by officers in cases. And as normal at scrutiny panels, please raise your hand if you have a question to ask. And Ian will keep a running record of that. I hope he's got enough pages, should be. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions of who wishes to ask a question, and we'll do that. There may well be a question answer that you wish to ask later on, so obviously don't please repeat the question. This is not a casework surgery either, so this is a budget scrutiny meeting that we run for the benefit of all the people in Plymouth, all our residents. Individual issues, perhaps in your ward or a colleague's ward, that can be discussed in a different forum. So, as we wait for the leader and the chief executive to come in, can I introduce or ask people around the table to introduce themselves, because you can see their names, but because there are people here who you may not come across in your various scrutiny roles, not in normal situations. So we'll start on.
I'm Helen Slater. I'm Assistant Head of Finance, and I also cover adult social care, community connections and public health.
Paul Barnard, I'm the Service Director for Strategic Planning and Infrastructure.
Kareem Hassan, I'm the Interim Strategic Director for Growth.
Morning all, I'm David Draffin, the Council Service Director for Economic Development.
So Wendy Eldridge, Lead Accountancy Manager for Capital and Treasury Management.
Okay, let's start with session one, and welcome to Tracy, our Chief Exec, and Tudor, our leader, and David Northey, our Section 151 person. So it's one of the most glamorous titles you could have, and it sounds like something from MI5. Okay, the first session that we're going to open with is going to be led by the leader of the council and cabinet member for finance, who has liaised with David in his absence, and obviously Tudor as well. So, and I hand over now to the leader of the council. So open, please.
Morning everyone.
Yes, so I'll be doing my usual spot and then a brief impersonation of Councillor Lowry. But obviously, as you've indicated, Mr. Northey is here with the safety net. So that's all good. Jemima will deal with the cultural aspects of her portfolio as well. So that's all good. It's an important budget for Plymouth, Chair, because we're at the moment, on top of everything else, we're dealing with discussions about devolution, and as if that weren't enough, conversations about local government reorganisation. So how many curveballs can you deal with at once? And on top of that, potentially a referendum for a directly elected mayor, just to put a little oil on troubled waters. I'll talk about that a little bit more if required. But this budget is a budget that shows why Plymouth matters. It's a growth budget. It's going to support the creation of 8,000 jobs. It's a budget that's going to drive value for the whole travel to work area. It's a budget that places Plymouth as the growth engine for Devon and the sub-region. It's a budget that maintains ambition with a £395 million capital programme supported by a massive 137 million in external grants. It's also a Labour budget that supports and protects some of the most vulnerable people in our community, with significant additional funding for children's services and adult social care. It's a budget that shows better than anything the value of Plymouth City Council as a unitary authority in control of its own destiny. Plymouth matters, and we are on the cusp of the greatest and sustained period of investment in 2 generations. We have a moment in time to grasp this unique opportunity and to transform the wealth and living standards of the city. We're home to the largest naval base in Western Europe. Our economy is worth £6.9 billion and supports 116,000 jobs. Our economy supports over 2 billion gross value added for the travel to work area. 13% of Babcock employees travel in every day from Cornwall. To put this in perspective, Plymouth's economy is 50% as big as all of Cornwall's economy and 32% as big as Devon's economy. We are big, we are clever. We have an investment pipeline of £5.5 billion. Our economic strategy will deliver, as I say, 8,000 new jobs and 1,000 new businesses. We have the greatest marine employment of any town or city in the UK at 20,110 jobs. That's 19% of all employment. And 1.2 billion of gross value added. That's 22%. We have ambitions to build over 10,000 homes in and around the city centre, to support this growth. This is what this budget is all about. And it really matters. I do want to talk a little about economic development, as I think it's fair to say that we've had a stellar year, and this budget will maintain this trajectory, protecting our amazing teams. So in 2024, the Economic Development Department will have delivered £28.5 million of income generated for the use of the council, an investment pipeline of £5.5 billion. External grant funding of 102.4 million. Capital investment, 280 million. And on top of all of that, we were awarded the accolade of being the #1 good growth city in the country with the PricewaterhouseCoopers Index. So some of our highlights this year include the Mill Bay Port Facilities, a £23 million investment. The Community Diagnostics Hub, a £32.5 million investment. Derryford District Centre, a £19 million investment. The Freeport, a £25 million investment. Oceans Gate Innovation Barns, a £7 million investment. Beaumont Way Direct Development, an £8 million investment. The Brickfields Regeneration, a £22 million investment. The National Marine Park, a £10 million investment. The Guildhall Refurbishment, a £4 million investment. The Plymouth City Council Property Regeneration Fund, £54.3 million of approved investment. The Civic Centre deal, £75 million deal for housing and a blue-green skills hub. Adoption of the city's first ever port strategy, a brand new economic plan, designation of Plymouth by Homes England as a priority place for housing investment. And looking forward to 2025, this budget will see the completion of Langage Beaumont Way Direct Development. It'll see the completion of the Ocean Gate Innovation Barns. It'll see the completion of Shore Power at Mill Bay. It'll see the completion of the Tinside Works. It'll see the completion of Mountbatten Centre and its new state-of-the-art pontoon, and the Brickfields scheme completed and start on site at Mount Edgecombe Garden Battery refurbishment. Don't forget, this scale of delivery is because this council has prioritised growth, not just in this budget, but for the last 15 years, delivering transformative projects again and again and again. Just let me remind you what they are. The City Deal, Marine Enterprise Zone, the Range Head Office, redevelopment of Royal William Yard, The Box, buying Home Park to help save Plymouth Argyle, securing Barden Corporation's future in Plymouth, Plymouth Science Park, building Plymouth, Mayflower 400 and Resurgam. So this budget isn't easy, and we have our challenges, as Mark would have set out had he been here, but I'm going to set out for you. But never before has a budget talked to the power of a city unitary authority to drive growth. Not only growth for Plymouth, but for the whole region. This is why Plymouth matters, and this is why Plymouth as a unitary council matters. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Leader. And shall we go to David now? Do you want to give the...
Through you, Chair. Excuse me. Judah is going to cover for Mark.
Okay.
Thank you.
It is my sworn duty as leader to deputise for my deputies when they are not here.
Thank you.
So I intend to be brief, as Mark would have been. You have seen the papers, so you don't need me to run through them again. But I do need to address a key issue before we proceed, because one of the first questions you might ask is this a legal budget? It's a fair question. Given last year, we had the postponement of the council meeting, if you remember, from February to March. You might want to ask what the current position is. And as stated in the papers, and having taken advice from David, our Section 151 officer, we can proceed with this budget as set out. We're in active dialogue with MHCLG colleagues in government to resolve the outstanding capitalisation direction, and expect an update within the coming weeks, days, I hope, because Tracy and I were in London yesterday where we met with the Baroness Taylor, and I had one of our, and another thing asked, didn't I, at the end, towards the end of the meeting, and explained that we were one of 19 councils that are currently seeking capitalisation, direction and exceptional financial support. Of course, we're the only council not requiring any additional money. And explaining once again that this time last year, due to government incompetence, we had to delay our budget. Oh, excuse me. Don't know why that's on. This year, we wanted to avoid that, and we need her to hurry up and approve these 19. But this budget that we're presenting today is balanced. It's not the end of the process, because over to you when we've finished, for 2 days of budget scrutiny, at the end of which the Cabinet will consider your recommendations, and then that consolidated view will be put to the whole council. So the full council, hopefully on the 24th of February, we're all hoping for that. And at that meeting, we will set the council tax as well. Now, we have been promised by the government that this is going to be the last single year settlement from the government. They have promised that the next settlement, when they next have a financial event, fiscal event, they will be announcing a 3-year financial settlement, which local government has long wished for. We in this room, I think, have discussed this on many occasions. So it'll be good to see that pledge delivered. This budget sets out clearly the impact of the additional funding and resources, and also the actions required to mitigate continuing rising demand pressures on all the areas that we've been dealing with in recent years. So that's adult social care. We've allocated in this budget additional funding of £12 million. Homelessness and emergency bed and breakfast, we have allocated additional funding of £750,000, £750,000. For children's social care and home to school transport, huge demand pressures in these areas. But we have allocated additional funding, but a total of 19 million is being added in these areas, reflecting the extraordinary steepling costs. My colleague, Councillor Lang, has explained on a few occasions to you about the scalping that's going on in the private sector over this at the moment, being one of the reasons. Now, through additional core resources, revenue support grant, council tax business rates, the overall budget funding envelope has increased. We have needed to draw down just shy of £5 million worth of reserves to cover one-off costs, but together this means that the net resources increased by over £17 million next year, right? £17 million is an extraordinary uplift there. Appendix 1 sets out the net additional cost pressures and adjustments required, totaling over 50 million, and the offset from the resources and grants require £14 million of savings. Overall, this is an incredibly positive budget, and I'm just going to run through some of the things that are captured through this budget. We have not closed any libraries, for example. We have consolidated the additional funding from last year for grass cutting, for example. We have increased the allocation for the net zero budget to reinforce our commitment to net zero, for example. Additional allocations have been made to demand-led services, as I outlined. And this budget confirms our commitment to Plymouth Active Leisure with increased funding for them. We still have an ambitious capital programme too, with the required funding. No fantasy hospitals for us, Chair. So on that, I will hand over now, I think, to David, who's going, if he want to say, if I've left you anything, I'm Tracy, to guide you through the rest of this morning.
Thank you. Over to Tracy.
Chair, I'm sure you'll want to get on to all the questions you've got for us this morning, so I'll make this this brief. I think the leaders set out those key priorities for the council, and no one, I think, wouldn't know those. If you walk around the building, you'll see the corporate plan, you'll see how we line up to make sure we're delivering those priorities. But I just wanted to say a few words about some of the other things that really are very important to the work that we're doing. Firstly, with a new government in, there are lots of changes nationally that are starting to filter down to us and indeed to all local authorities. So the capacity to be able to analyse that and then to be able to deal with that is a really important part of what we need to do. The leaders mentioned some of those key elements of governance changes that are proposed for the future, and whether that is devolution, local government reorganisation, or the process we're in at the moment, which is validation of a petition in relation to a directly elected mayor. So lots of work, and of course we are still in the process, and the government haven't, the Boundary Commission haven't told us otherwise, of a ward boundary review. So governance for us is going to be quite a defining space for us in the next couple of years. Having a stable platform financially is really important, and the work that we do, and I want to pay tribute to David for all the work he does in terms of the leadership around the financial management and stability of this council. The work is absolutely outstanding. The programmes for change, the programmes for development, you'll hear about those over the coming day or so. Very much focusing now, our attention turns to prevention. How do we make sure that people can lead those glorious ordinary lives that adult social care talk about, and we don't need them to come to see us because those lives are the lives that they want to be able to lead. So prevention is going to be a really key plank of balancing our budget. You'll hear about the ways in which we're looking to reduce the cost of accommodation, particularly for children's social care, for school provision, where we're looking at SEND and inclusion, for homelessness. So you'll see that's a really important part of what we do. The growth agenda is still absolutely live in this council. You've heard of the amount of investment, both directly and indirectly for the city, and that growth agenda, what we call our growth and municipal enterprise plank of the medium-term financial plan, is really important. And then finally, continuing to drive the most efficient organisation we can be. We've done a huge amount of work to drive that efficiency, but there will be more to do. There are enablers, and very importantly for us, the biggest enabler of making things happen are the people who work for this council. And so the people plan, and again, over the next day or so, you'll hear from Chris Squire about the people plan, the next stage of the people plan, how we want to make sure that people, we are an employer of choice, people stay with us, they can develop a career with us. So that's going to be a very important element of what we do and what you hear about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracy, and all three for the introduction to that. You'll need to shoot your hands up if you wish to ask a question, and Ian's BDI will go from left to right, and right to left. Okay, we'll start off. Can I just say we'll come to Councillor Murphy, but what you're describing is, and you mind, Mrs. Councillor Lang, yeah, is actually not just a way of doing, but being as a council, which is coming through your messages there, and perhaps the funding reasons from the government as well to be for our people. Can I just go to Councillor Lang first?
Thank you, Chair. I've got a very brief introduction, if that's all right, and I probably better do it now before. Thank you. So, because what I wanted to do was to take this opportunity to talk specifically about culture and why we continue to prioritise investment in the box, Mount Edgecombe, our heritage in creative industries, as well as cultural organisations such as Plymouth Culture, Destination Plymouth, the Barbican Theatre and Theatre All, to name but a few. This budget backs culture, whether cultural placemaking, driving national recognition, attracting talent, empowering local residents, supporting our diverse communities, job creation, supporting inward investment or civic pride. Investment in culture can move the dial on all of these things, and it does. So I'd just like to briefly illustrate the impact this budget will have by protecting cultural investment. If I start with box visitor numbers, this year the box will reach its 1 millionth visitor. And that's a feat that would have taken our old museum 12 years. And I don't think there's a council initiative that's been so universally loved by the city's population and that has transformed our reputation, both nationally and internationally. We're celebrating Devonport 200. Culture is rooted in our communities, and we are celebrating this huge milestone properly with £250,000 of lottery funding. And this included an event at the box the weekend before last, where more than 300 people attended, and we received 25 new acquisitions, which will have a home in the box. Our international cultural programme, we've collaborated with some great cultural institutions, giving Plymouth audiences a unique opportunity to see London shows, including the National Portrait Gallery, the V&A, the Royal Academy, Hepworth Wakefield, Tate, and the British Museum. And then I come on to match funding. So the Arts Council recognises that Plymouth's investment in culture and provides us with £4.1 million of match funding through the city's national portfolio organisations. And this includes a massive 1.2 million every year for the box. And this council budget will allow us to confidently bid to secure that funding beyond 2025 in the next MPO round. You'll have heard about the See for Yourself programme. This year we secured £750,000 from the Arts Council to become a place partnership, bringing a new cultural programme to 600,000 people, connecting residents to the sea. Our Blue Plaque programme, this year we're going to be working to refresh our blue plaques. Did you know that we have over 200 of them in the city? And we'll be loving the ones we already have, as well as encouraging more nominations from residents. Education. The box welcomed nearly 30,000 school children, 80% of our schools, and through the Cultural Education Partnership, we will be maximising opportunities for young people in the city to have cultural experiences. And in Tavistock Place, we'll continue our cultural placemaking agenda by demolishing old offices on Tavistock Place for the next phase of cultural investment. And looking ahead to the rest of this year, we have so much to look forward to. The Box new programme and 5th birthday, featuring John Lyons, the Windrush exhibition, Jill Bradley, 100 Years of Surrealism, where we'll have work from Dali and Man Ray, and Jeremy Deller's Triumph of Art, which will be an exciting happening in July. We'll be relaunching Britain's Ocean City brand, and we're also adopting a new plan for creative industries. It's an exciting and thriving part of what this council does and is known for, and this budget allows it to continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, over to Councillor Murphy, please.
Thank you, Chair. We have a number of companies that we own or have a partnership or part ownership. How do we manage these companies, please? And that was a question for Mark, but obviously, so I don't know who's going to take it, you, Tudor, or David, I don't know.
Through you, Chair, I'll try that one. Thank you for the question. Yes, you're absolutely right. Excuse me. You're absolutely right. We do have quite a big portfolio of family of companies. We have recently, with the help from Councillor Lowry, actually set up 2 boards to look at the governance and administration. So one is an officer-led, and then recommendations will come into a subcommittee of cabinet to actually make the decisions as shareholders in those companies. So we're very aware of the need to keep an eye on those companies and to actually engage more. So for instance, you will know that, or you won't know, but we've been inviting some of the chief officers to come into the corporate management team meetings and actually give us an update, and that is now a feature of how we're running those companies.
Okay. Yeah.
Just through you, Chair. What I'll do now is circulate the report that went to Audit and Governance in September, which provides all the detail you need, just in case you need to base any recommendations on that.
Councillor Finn, please. Oh. God, very keen. You've had your 2 Weetabix today, haven't you? Okay, Councillor Finn, please.
I'd just like to just drill down into a couple of things. I think we need to be also pragmatic about where we're actually going. On page 8, it says that the wider economic environment and accounts as comparatively low level of financial reserves. This was something that was picked up by Grant Thornton, the auditor, at the audit and governance meeting before last, to which they actually termed that it was we were in a critical position. So I suppose what the question is, what we're going to be doing to address that going forward. Also, if we look at the debt burden, well, we're heading to over £1 billion now. Obviously, while we're paying net interest on debt, it has to be paid for at the revenue budget. Is there an impact on services? And I suppose most alarming was the delivery of net zero in Plymouth, 65.935 million, like 66 million. There's no breakdown of what that is for, where it's going, and when you consider the housing crisis in Plymouth, would part of that money not be better spent alleviating the housing problem as opposed to a huge sum over for net zero?
Through you, Chair, I think there's some technical questions that Mark would normally try to cover off, so I'll have a go at those. I think the reports that are being referred to are sort of backward-looking. We've explained to Audit and Governance Committee that we've been in a bit of a turmoil nationally, not just locally, but nationally, in terms of resources for external auditors, which has led to a problem. So what is happening is reports are coming forward that are talking about 1920, 2021. I always respond at Audit and Governance to the question of, are our reserves enough to sustain us? Are we a sustainable council? And I say we're in January 2025. We are still here and we are still fighting fit. So that kind of answers the backward-looking question. In terms of do we have enough reserves, my answer to that one is if you compare us nationally, we are in the lower quartile, so fully accept that. But if you go back through quite a long history for Plymouth City Council, we have been living in the lower quartile. What gives me assurance is if you look at the national trends, we might be starting at a lower base, but if there's a peak or a trough, we follow it. And as I say, we are still sustainable because we've got a balanced budget in front of us. The other thing I think might be useful just to point out to the committee is if you turn to, I think it's page 19 in the pack, there's a sort of a colour diagram there that's talking about the working balance. So when we talk about reserves, I think we have to be sort of honing in a little bit. So we have usable reserves, which, as you would do in your own life, we put away for all kinds of different issues that might arise. But we keep what we call this rainy day fund, the working balance. And anyone at Audit and Governance will know that I've talked a lot about sort of a 5% guideline. Now, that's not a written rule, that's just kind of something that the sector works to. And we've been trying to get above that. So if you look at that graph, what it does show, and it says in 25.5, that as we closed the accounts for 2021 and 1920, we actually were able to top up that reserve. So we are now currently actually above that 5% sort of level. So as we stand, that working balance is improving. And I make it clear in any MTFP, MTFS, that we need to keep trying to replenish. We normally start with something like £750,000 as a start point. I hope the committee would understand that when you're trying to balance a budget and things are getting squeezed, that's one area that you look at. But we do have a plan to increase those reserves, but I am comfortable that we have what we require set out in this budget. So that was that one. I think the second one, Chair, was about sustainable if we're trying to borrow £1 billion, yeah. Which is not in the budget papers itself, but it's in the supplementary, which is part of the Treasury Management and Capital Strategy. Again, we've talked about that extensively at audit and governance. So, as I say, that's a sort of a 5-year projection of if we were to keep investing and having to go externally to borrow. Those projections never quite get to those worst case scenarios. What the leader has set out is a very ambitious budget. There's a very ambitious capital programme which is funded. So we have been doing extensive reviews of the capital programme to make sure that it is affordable. And I hope you would recognise that if we are giving sort of 19 million, for instance, to children's services, that we are not pulling back on the day-to-day vital services that we provide for the people of Plymouth. So it's not a either or, so we're covering both. So hopefully that answers that question. And I think the third one was about, we're a little bit loose in here about the net zero. We've got Paul Barnard who could give you more detail, but certainly there is a plan. We meet as a corporate management team on a monthly basis, so we have a board set up to look at the projects, but I'm quite happy to hand over to Paul for more detail on that one.
Yes, Chair, I can briefly comment on what makes up that 65 million. It does include projects for investing in retrofit of homes, so it does address issues around housing. So there's the social housing decarbonisation fund, there's funding in the plan for homes to deliver more energy efficient homes, but it also includes things like the local electric vehicle infrastructure funding that we secured from government, the net zero buses programme, various transforming cities fund projects, including the very successful mobility hubs, the decarbonisation of our own fleet, obviously reflecting the fact that buildings and transport are the largest emitters. And last but not least, it obviously includes the multitude of initiatives that make up the National Marine Park.
Thank you. Councillor Finn, does that answer your questions?
It partly answered it at this moment, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to know about? Now's your chance to ask.
No, I'll wait for the others to go first and then I'll come back. Let's have a thought.
Over to David.
Just one small piece on the net zero as well. It's worth mentioning that within the capital programme, all the funding we're getting from national government, so for economic development, it's 102 million. All of that has net zero requirements in it. So there's been an absolute shift in all of our building programme. So if you look at our building programme, it's fundamentally different. So there's a significant element of money that's available for that also.
Thank you. Councillor Blight, please.
Thank you. My original question has already been answered, which was about the reserves. So just to pick up on one thing, David, you mentioned, I think I understood you right, cabinet members are shareholders of our family of companies. Could you just explain that, please? Do you mean on behalf of the council rather than private, just to reassure residents?
Just to reassure you, yes. So we're talking about companies that are either wholly owned or mainly owned by Plymouth City Council, and we're talking about shareholders as opposed to the directors of the company. So it's making sure that they are acting in the best interest of Plymouth City Council.
Thank you. Can I have permission to intervene there about the reserves as well, because it might be worth considering a recommendation perhaps about the cabinet preparing a plan on how to replenish some of our reserves, say over the next 2 years, because what we've seen today and heard today and read is that there is an increase in budget after a sustained period of cuts over many years, and some of those increases we hope would be sustained and increased, some may be one-off. So we will inevitably always be calling on our reserves, which that's what they're there for the rainy days, and living in Plymouth we do get lots of rainy days. But it would be good to have an intentional plan to see how we replenish the reserves as much as we can. So that's something perhaps we could bring up at the end of the session. Councillor Dingle, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was just looking for really a little bit more clarification on how much it has cost Plymouth City Council to develop the Freeport.
Do you want me to put that? So The great news about the Freeport is, I think we've covered it in the growth scrutiny panel, is that it is a source of money to deliver our existing strategies. So everything we want to do, developing Oceans Gate, supporting the marine sector, supporting the defence sector, this was an acceleration. If you go back to our city deal, I think it was 2016, 2015 that we did, this follows on from that, and they're in enterprise zone. So the great news for us is actually all of our investment has been service borrowing funded by the assets that generate us income. So we had a capacity grant from MHCLG to start the process, and we had 25 million of seed capital as a grant. So whilst we've put significant borrowing in against projects, namely the innovation barns that Tudor has mentioned, but also Langage, the next phase of our direct development programme, those are investment in assets. And we've got grant part of that 25 million to offset our borrowing, which means that we're effectively getting endowed with assets. Once our borrowing has completed, we'll have significant upside. In addition to that, we get to keep the retained business rates. So obviously, normally the council gets the rates, but in this case, we get the rates twice. Once they come back to the councils as normal, and there are obviously 3 local authorities involved, but the rates also go back to the Freeport, and it's a local authority owned company, and David's been talked about that. There's £80 million of retained rates over the life of the Freeport as a maximum potential, which is available for investment back into economic development initiatives. So one of the reasons for investing in the Freeport was that it wasn't going to cost us money, but it was a major boost for inward investment and a cash injection. So I think we were very lucky and pleased to succeed in getting it.
Thank you. Councillor Dingle, does that answer your question? Okay, thank you. And now to Councillor Freeman, please.
My turn. Okay, so we know that there has been a petition going on for a directly elected mayor, and this has been submitted. What I'd like to know more about is how much the referendum is going to cost to be done. Is that accounted for within the budget that we have before us today? So any information about that, please.
Over to Tracy, please.
We're in the, as I mentioned earlier, we're in the process of validating a petition that we've received. And in relation to the cost of a referendum, it's a standalone election as a referendum. The cost of that is 20 wards. We normally, when we do local council elections, as you're aware, it's normally 19 wards, so it's 20 wards. And the calculation that we have at the moment is that will be £410,000 to conduct that referendum. And in terms of the funding for that is a conversation with finance around that working balance.
Blimey.
Follow up on that, please, Chair. Thank you. So if that sort of money is not already accounted for in the budget, is it literally a case of needing to use reserves to pay for that? Or is it a case of we take it away from another budget line to be able to balance still?
David?
So through you, Chair, this is an absolute example, isn't it, of how something can land in front of us. So we built up a budget, and absolutely we will not be diverting money from other services in order to cover this. When I build a budget, I always make sure that we hold back something in contingency. The disappointment is how quickly this would probably eat into that. But just to give the committee assurance, it will not be cutting services in order to pay for this. We'll find a different route through.
Thank you. And the leader, talk to you, please.
I'm always interested in what the officer's got to say on this issue, but I mean, fundamentally, how we pay for this will be a matter for the council. So it may be if there's a requirement to use those working balances, then if I take your recommendation, right, if we take your recommendation to put back in money to increase the working balances, and we take the money for this referendum out of the working balances, that's a double whammy in year on other services and other pressures on the council. So there would have to be a conversation about, number one, how we repay the cost of the working balances for the referendum, and secondly, how we pay back into working balances to meet your recommendation to increase working balances and keep it at 5%. Now, if you're looking at that, that's an in-year pressure of getting on for 850,000, maybe more, right? So I think we've got to be careful here, but I don't want to understate this. It is a sudden and unexpected cost on the council, and there's no guarantee of success or failure for that referendum. What we do know is it will cost an enormous sum of money to do it. And then what we also know, that if there's a vote in favour of it, then there will be an additional cost to the council on paying for the mayor's office. Okay, because people are being told at the moment that this is instead of, and it's not, it's as well as the existing council. It's an additional layer of bureaucracy, more politicians and more expense, with no more power and no more money coming from the government. There's complete fabrication of how this referendum's been, how this petition's been arrived at. Completely misleading to the public. But what the public need to know is that this is if this referendum is successful, this is the first of many shocks like this to the public purse that will be coming our way if we get a directly elected mayor for the city.
Thank you. Can I follow that up as well? Because you've given the cost of a referendum where people may have that chance to say, do you want one or not? What about the cost of the election of a directly elected mayor?
So the process of the election, depending on all the timings, and we're still to work through this. If we combine it with the existing programme of elections that we have, our elections by thirds, then there is an additional cost because, as I said earlier, there is an extra ward that we'd always put into a referendum, an extra costs involved, and that extra cost on top of our normal elections would be £85,000. So that would be, so in total for the year we have a mayoral election as well as city council elections. The total cost in the budget would move from 380,000 to 465,000 that year.
That's quite scary, given that we're all sitting here and over the next 2 days looking how best to spend a finite amount of money for the benefit of all our children, older people, everybody in the city, when actually it could be an issue that money is diverted for which will not have a direct impact on their lives. Thank you for that. We'll watch this space, I suppose.
Follow on with that still, though, please, Chair, if I may. So, if worst case scenario, if we were to end up with an elected mayor, what happens then when devolution comes along? We have yet another mayor on top?
What we do know is that the government are saying that there would be a requirement for areas of the country to come together in what they call strategic mayoral combined authorities. So you'd have heard me argue the other day for a peninsula one, which would involve Devon, Torbay, Plymouth and Cornwall, which would need to have a directly elected mayor for that whole area. So we'd be in a situation in Plymouth where we could have a strategic mayor, a directly elected mayor and a Lord Mayor. Here's the weird thing. How many mayors do you need to run a city? I don't know. It's one of those sort of questions, isn't it? It's like how many people do you need to change a light bulb question, isn't it? But actually it's not a joke. It's very serious. What we're talking about here is layers upon layers of more bureaucracy, and I'm not, as I say, I know that we've debated this in the past. The council has debated this twice in the past, or rather, there have been plebiscites held twice with cross-party support on the council against it because of that cost thing that you were alluding to. And we'll see how it goes. When the referendum is called, there'll be a neutral position for the council. It can't advocate one way or the other. It just has to play it straight. So I'm getting me all in while I still can. But seriously, the strategic mayor will have a different role from the day-to-day management, but accountability through that would be a bit, I think, tortuous would be, to say the least, I think.
Councillor Allison, please.
Plymouth is one of the most deprived local authorities in the country, coming in the top 30%. What has the government, if anything, done to help us address this, and how is that reflected in the budget in front of us?
Well, obviously, I'm not here to answer for the government, though I'm very pleased with some of the things that they've already done. I mean, if I mention what I did in the budget, in my opening remarks, for example, there's been an uplift in the grant support that this council's getting on for 17% in a year, which is tremendous. I mean, like many politicians in this room and outside, we've had a lot to be unhappy about with the constant cuts to our budget. Sorry, I'm a bit distracted because the webcast seems to have gone off. I don't know whether it has or not, but television. Oh, it's okay then. Nothing to worry about there, just the television going off. That 17% is really important because it's gone to helping us do things like the adult social care and the children's care. It's also that homelessness prevention stuff is really important. The net zero stuff that's coming down the track. That thing about tackling fuel poverty, particularly important. That's where the net zero agenda matters so much, because actually, when you're arguing against net zero policies in this council, what you're actually arguing against is reducing fuel bills. You might not like to think of it that way, but that's exactly what you're doing. You know, that's the whole purpose of this. And also, you know, when you're arguing against net zero policies, you're actually arguing against things like the zebra bus, where half of our buses or buses are going to be net zero. Why is that important? It's great for bus passengers. It's really good for people who are walking past buses because they're not breathing in diesel anymore. That's really good for children. It's good for children with low birth weight. It's really good for children who are living in poverty, not to have that to contend with anymore. So these are the things that really matter. You know how it all links together? That's how it all links together. And that's why we pursue this net zero agenda, for example, with vigour. That's why it's erroneous to even suggest that pursuing net zero policies is against anti-poverty. It's actually delivering anti-poverty strategies. And that's why it's so important.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Councillor Ricketts, please.
Yeah, I think one of my questions was superseded by Councillor Freeman. I assume the white paper was going to supersede the elected mayor situation, because I'm absolutely shocked that the government hasn't intervened, because that's coming down the line. But if that's what it is, that's what it is. Yeah, if you want to.
Well, I mean, the law is currently as it is, unfortunately. Okay, so until the English Devolution Bill becomes the English Devolution Act, there's nothing that can be done. So we have to pursue this because the people who have promoted the petition decided to put it in now rather than to wait till after the legislation. If they'd have waited till after the legislation, maybe it would have been a different thing. But the government can't act, because the government will be acting ultra vires itself if it intervened, because that would be an assumption around what the legislation is going to finally end up looking like. That's why it's a pain. It really is a pain. But we have to proceed on this basis, I'm afraid, and the taxpayer's going to have to pick up the tab of this project.
Councillor Ricketts?
So I'm hoping the government can find some sort of way to intervene. But on another, my original questions is: you've obviously meeting with people in high office in London. Have you spoken to them about the impact of national insurance contributions and how that's having a serious effect on us getting a balanced budget?
Through the Local Government Association Chair, we've been making, along with all the local government representations over the impact of national insurance contributions. You'll know, I think, from the budget papers that we received cover for our costs associated with Plymouth City Council staff. And of course, some of the uplift that I described will go to covering the increased costs that will be borne by local firms that currently supply services to the council in adult social care and in children. But I mean, great news yesterday at Derryford with the announcement of the hospital building project, which you'll remember was being floated as a new hospital for Plymouth, unfunded, of course, by the previous government. And as a result, of course, of the national insurance rise, only putting back to the national insurance level it was before the Tories cut it about 2 years ago. But nevertheless, that money has raised £22 billion for the National Health Service. And we're getting the first down payment of that in terms of our new hospital building project. Why is that important? Because that's going to enable faster throughput from patients through our major trauma hospital. So it's got to be welcome, doesn't it? That money being actively used so quickly as a result of that national insurance rise.
Thank you. And that hospital not only benefits the the people, but the staff who work there as well. But equally, what we have to remember, whilst there's a situation on the national insurance for employers, our residents are getting increased pay, and many of them are the lowest earners. So we're hoping some of that money then will be the intention is it be reinvested into the local economy for their benefit. Follow up?
I see what.
Can you speak into the mic, please? Some people can't hear you.
I see what you're saying there, but it is apparent that these national insurance contributions, the rise in them are really affecting local businesses, and it's mentioned in the report about the damage to the economy at the moment, and also obviously affecting councils getting a balanced budget that we're not going to get answers to till the end of the month.
David, would you want to come in?
Through you, Chair, if I just, you're absolutely right. So in terms of, excuse me, in terms of the budget here that we're looking at, there is a gap described between full compensation, 100%, and a contribution. So just a couple of things to think about. Number one, the actual grant that we are going to receive for our national insurance was kept outside of the settlement, which suggests that there's movement going on, and that government have made it very clear that they do not quote the numbers that we are giving you at the moment. They have not sent out allocations. We have used our own calculations, and we are, as representatives of the sector, and I sit on lots of committees, making representations to the right people, and our voice is being heard. So I am hopeful that when we get to the final settlement, there will be an adjustment to that number. But absolutely right, in the papers at the moment, there's about a £300,000 shortfall. But we'll see what happens when we get to the final numbers.
Thank you.
More at the moment, Chair, if that's okay. Keep the flow. It's very closely related. Right, keep the flow, if that's
how
okay.
Close?
On page 12, 3.4, I just wanted to get into the 1.7 applied increase into the business rates retention and revenue support grant. How did those decisions come about? What's a bit more on the rationale and the mechanics? I just want local business to do well.
So again, through you, Chair, there's a couple of things here. The previous government made a commitment that whatever the CPI number was at the end of the September of the preceding year would be the number that they would use to uplift grants. So we have to be sort of thankful, if that's the right word, that the big grant, the revenue support grant, which was being eroded year on year, is starting to grow again. So it was 1.7, that was the number. The way that this falls, if another 2 weeks, and it would have been 2.3%, but it's 1.7. They also used that to give us rates relief. So rather than passing on the increase to local businesses, they cap the charges that we can put out there, but then they compensate us back. So they're saying that the inflationary gap is 1.7%, so we'll get that as a grant as well.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Councillor Zoe Riley, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question, I think, probably would be for Tracy. You've talked about people plan, jobs and staffing, noting that you've made a number of permanent senior staff put people in place. What is the plan going forward? Because looking at the number of interims that we do have, is there anything you could give us on that, please?
Yes, thank you very much. The chair will know that we had what seemed to be a regular Friday slot in the Chief Officer's Appointments panel for a number of months in trying to make sure that we could recruit to posts. So I'm absolutely delighted that we're making some really good progress in recruiting to posts in the senior positions, and that's absolutely great news. We've got 2 interims with us at the corporate management team. We are going through recruitment for the strategic director for growth at the moment, and so that process is underway, and we will be looking to go back out to recruit for a chief operating officer. So those plans are all in place. And then at the service director level, we have got a vacancy. Lisa Linscott has just left us. Amanda Davis is joining us on an interim basis, and we will move forward with recruitment there. So we're trying to fill those slots as best we can. Recruitment is tricky, and those of you that are involved in the Chief Officer's Appointments panel will know that it's a really tight labour market, and we want to make sure we get the best. So we have taken our time. We've made sure we've trawled as widely as we can, that we're attracting people here, and the appointments we've made are very, very positive, but more to come in 2025.
Thank you. And as we know, some of our interims have become permanent as well. But also, just to reassure you, on behalf of the Chief Officers panel, the interims that we have are of good quality, save somebody's blushes in the room. So actually, you do gain that experience and fresh eyes and fresh look at what we do as a council, even though they're in a role of interim. So they still have equal value pending the permanent appointment, or arm twisting sometimes if some of them needed an arm twisted. Please.
Thank you, Chair. In April, we put in place an allowance for foster carers equal to their council tax liability, and I understand why we've done that. I really do understand that. Could we consider some sort of scheme for our serving personnel who are deployed for 6 months or more?
David, probably.
I'll take that one, I think. Yes. So we do have, as we need to have a council tax support scheme, as you will be aware, Councillor, which is built on national guidelines, but we do have some local flexibility. So you'll be aware that we've given support to veterans, as an example, because of their strong heritage of Plymouth. So I think that could possibly be a recommendation that you might want to make for us to have a look at that and cost it through and see what that might look like. I suppose there's always going to be winners and losers, aren't there? Because if you say, I don't know, deployment 6 months would qualify, you'll have people saying, well, I was away for 5 months or whatever. But quite happy to take that as a recommendation if that would be useful.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, David, because the belief is that like servicemen and servicewomen and service personnel get paid actually loads of money, but if you actually dig deep, they don't. So I think it would be really, really helpful to families within the city. And I'm talking like married. This would be for obviously probably mostly for married people, because if they're away for 6 months, maybe we could look at something for the partners or spouses or whatever are left behind, because 6 months is a long time for them to try and find bills that they have to pay, and it's not being occupied by their partner or spouse. So I really would appreciate that if that was put as a recommendation.
Yeah, we'll take that up as a recommendation and look into the issue and take it forward that way. Thank you, Pauline and David. Councillor Finn, please.
Yeah, just to say, I find myself in an unusual position. I actually agree with Tudor and Tracy. Especially in regard to.
Can you repeat that, please?
You can put that. You can put
Sorry,
that.
I thought I heard something. I just want to check if it was right.
You can actually put that on record as well. I'll buy him a pint afterwards. No, about the
record. It'll be on Spotlight.
Yeah, regarding the mayor, I think what people need to be aware of, that it could actually lead to 2 further precepts on their council tax. If we've got to fund another layer of local bureaucracy within the council itself, and then we've got the regional mayor, and it's quite clear within the legislation there'll be a precept on that. It's not only council tax rises, but there's a further 2 rises to actually fund the 2 departments. So that's why I actually agree with Tudor on that. Net zero, I would agree to disagree based on Rachel Reeves's this morning actually saying that they're granting the 3rd runway at Heathrow. And secondly, especially with regard to net zero, we've got no control over what comes into the 3-pin socket here via the national grid. So whether that's actually achievable to zero, I would agree to disagree with. However, and I welcome, as opposed to Wes Streeting, that the Derriford Hospital was undeliverable. It was deliverable and affordable, but we know that anyway. But coming back to, and I certainly welcome it in the interest of the people of Plymouth that at last, after all these years, from when Freedom Field shut, when Royal Naval Hospital A&E closed, Derriford struggled. And this goes back to previous Labour administrations in 2000 through the Conservative administrations, and at last we've got the answer. And I certainly welcome that investment in the city. But when we look at it as well, national insurance rises, it has been negatively received, and we're well aware that we've lost 250 well-paid jobs in marine projects as we stand. Is this being monitored by the council, especially the possible outcomes? Regard to the buses, is another separate question, is when we consider competitive tendering, what is being done to help other...
Can we jump on the buses tomorrow? Is that okay? Because we'll do that with council.
Yeah, which is a serious public concern to address the overspend on capital projects. We've not been very good at it. We know it's totaling up to millions over the last few years. It's happened. We can't do anything about that. But what are we going to be doing going forward to protect the revenues?
Do I go to David and perhaps bring Paul in at some time? Yeah.
I'll go first, but I'm sure someone else will jump on the bus as well. I think that's quite a sweeping statement, Councillor, to say that we are sort of overspending and so on. So part of the new government's arrangements have set up a lessons learned, so that we look at a project when it finishes and we look back and say, what could we have done differently? And I think the example that we use currently would be the new bereavement service, and how that sort of ended up as it did. So it's now a finished project, and as officers and as members, we're going to look back and see what the lessons learned from there about when we struck the contracts and whether we should have been responsible, where the risks, etc., etc. So there's a lot of work going on in the background on that one. And as I said earlier, we have.
Okay. Do you want to come in, Leader? Is that okay? Leader adds a supplementary comment to that?
Well, it's really to, if you wouldn't mind, it's not right to suggest that we're overspending on capital. What we are seeing is a rise in costs of delivering capital projects, which dates back to the 49 days of Truss and her disastrous budget. We can also trace a little bit further back to management of COVID, but actually we've seen rises in our borrowing costs over the last 3 years, which has been very challenging to keep to existing assumptions around the cost of capital projects. I would not demur from the position that we could do better in terms of individual project management. I think we've said actually that we need to see improvements in project management in the authority as a whole, across the whole council. But, you know, it would be wrong to say that we're overspending. In fact, in terms of capital, it might be argued that we're underspending on the capital programme is actually the true position. It's the correct, factually correct position. And part of that reason is because some projects are, we've had contractors, for example, who put prices in, and then before they even set foot on site, changing their minds about how much it is and walking away. We've had that. We've had all sorts of things. So, you know, and by the way, not unique to Plymouth. Once again, I think it's fair to say. But I think in my list of things, you'd be hard-pressed to find a council in the whole of the southwest of England that's delivering what Plymouth is delivering at the moment on capital projects and investment. I think you'd be hard to find. I'd challenge any member of this panel to come up with an authority that does better. In fact, I'd probably want to challenge you to say anything outside of London would be hard-pressed. On the south coast would be hard-pressed to deliver more than Plymouth. I wait to be corrected, but I don't think I will be.
Thank you. Can I come into that then? Because obviously the external forces that are beyond our control affect the costing of capital projects. Is there a resource and capability plan so that if we have an ambitious capital project, but at times some things have to be kind of slightly delayed or altered in terms of their start dates or and whatever, is there a plan in place to with criteria on which ones actually get completed first, or perhaps have a delay due to the external costs that have been imposed upon successful completion of those?
Thank you. We've done a lot of work over the last 12 months in looking at our capital programme processes, which might sound very boring, but it's really important in making sure, as David said earlier, that we have a gateway process. We're really clear about what's in the pipeline for the programme, and as it works its way through. We do have a programme of review when we're looking at the resourcing envelope and where we are. Of course, for us, what's been really, really fortunate is the amount of external funding that we have, and that's really so positive. So it's not always possible to say delay that, move that one forward, because there will be grant conditions around many of the projects that we are delivering, and we have to deliver to those timescales. Just want to say one other thing, and I'm sure this wasn't the thought behind it. It's really important for us as an organisation to learn. Every single day should be a learning day for us. But it's also important that we give people safe spaces to learn, and to be able to really be clear about what went well, what didn't go well, what was in our control, and what actually is not in our control to change. And that makes us a better organisation, because we will truly learn in that way. If someone or an organisation feels that it's always going to be someone's fault that something happened, then that's a way in which it's not a learning organisation. That becomes quite a blame culture, which is not the best way of making sure we progress. So one of the things we do know is we're getting better at the way at which we deliver our projects, the programmes for project management, the capacity and capability within our project teams is really, really important to us, that we learn from that. And bereavement is a really good example. How many times in any council's life did they deliver a brand new crematorium? It's, you know, for so many organisations, it's a once in a generation, once in a lifetime thing that we quite literally do. So it's absolutely right that we learn those lessons and put that into practice for the next thing that we do on a scale, which, as the leader says, many councils, that would be their one capital project for 5 years. They would not be doing much else than that. And you look at the scale of the ambition and delivery here, it's a very, very different level.
Thank you. We can see the impact of that in the report as well, the long list of projects that are getting on. And David Draffen, your words took me the other day in the previous scrutiny meeting we had last week about I liked the way you said, we're very good at getting grants and very good at getting funding. I thought I liked that confidence because it wasn't empty words. It's seen all around us in what we read and what we see around the city. So thank you guys for all you do for that. Nay, please.
Hi, good morning. My question is going back to the budgets, and we can see that the city centre is undergoing transformational change at the moment. That will also include the civic centre. Can you tell us if we costed, have we got funds in the development for the civic centre?
Yes, is the short answer. But
I was going to have to take back my words.
But you probably want us to elaborate a little bit. So I think the starting point is the civic centre can't be demolished. So we've got this problem where we have to deal with it. So Urban Splash did a really good job, and they got this good planning permission, and obviously Paul led that process with them, and they secured future high streets funding. But exactly as has been described by Tudor, particularly the impact around inflation on the project, and Ukraine was a big part of that, and there were many national factors. It just became obvious that without more grant funding that the project was going to stall. And I think from all of our perspectives, it's such an iconic building, and if you can't demolish it, it's at the bottom of Mardow Way, just invest in the Mardow Way. It's hard to see how we could leave that to sort of rot, if you like. So what we had is an opportunity from the Levelling Up Fund of £8.5 million. We got 19.5 million, but we managed to identify 8.5 to address some of those costs, but by finding a new use for the ground floor, which was the Blue-Green Skills Academy, and I can talk to you about that and its impact. And that 8.5 million allowed us to get that brand new use in, but also address some of those rising costs at the same time. And the work that Tudor and Tracy particularly led around a new strategic relationship with Homes England and housing allowed us to enter a conversation about some significant funding opportunities for Homes England. And really because the gap funding, which was getting to around £40 million, was such, it was not appropriate for that scale of funding to go into the existing deal we had. It would have been the wrong thing to do. So not the fact that Urban Splash had done anything wrong particularly, but if we were going to invest £40 million of public funding, it felt really important to us that we should have control of it, but also we should have the upside. So where there are any upsides of the project later from the development value, that should come back to us and sit with us. So where we are at the moment is we are planning to take a cabinet report in March. We've got, of all those elements of funding, we've got all of them secured bar one, and one is in a due diligence stage, which we're going through in great detail with a national funding partner, Homes England. We're working through that, and that's going well. So assuming the timeline works, we should have a completely funded package to take to cabinet. Now, it's important to say, and you're talking about costs, you only have certain costs when you have a contract that gives you a guaranteed price. The construction market will not give you a guaranteed price in this current market. They just will not do that, and neither will they do that for a listed building. So we rely on cost estimates and cost consultants. We have to make assessments for inflation, assessments for the programme, assessments for abnormals. So, there's quite a difficult process of work to do. So we're currently in the process of stripping out the building, then we'll move into concrete repairs, and then we'll replace the cladding. And the cladding is a requirement of the listing. So, the minute the building was listed, we had a circa £17 million abnormal cost in terms of replacing that cladding. And that's a requirement of Heritage England, so we need to do that. Our current programme would see the building completed during the financial year of 28-29 in terms of the core works, and then we would be able to hand over the ground floor to the college to do their Blue-Green Skills Hub, which will deliver 2,000 students going through that per annum and 60 new courses. And then in parallel, we would have selected a housing developer with Homes England to basically deliver the apartments and then subsequently develop the car park out. So I think it's really important to say, if you think about the box was £47 million project, this is going to be probably by the time we're finished 100 million, and we're doing it in-house with some really good people. So we've got project directors, program managers, we've got the full project team, we've got external cost consultants, we've got professional advisors, we've got specialist advisors on the Building Safety Act. So it's one of the hardest projects I'll have ever done, I think, but I'm I'm feeling like after a long time, we're now in a position where we can hopefully at Cabinet in March move forward with real confidence. And I've said this before, if you look at the transformational moment in Birmingham city centre, I was there in the 90s and working for Marks Spencer when they dealt with the Rotunda building, which is actually quite similar. It's a 1960s sort of, it's circular as a square. And with a major public realm investment, that was the moment that made the transformation to the way the city centre was perceived as a place to live and a place, you know, for people to want to live. And I think that's why the Civic's so important, because if we get that right, and it's the start of a new community in the city centre. So I think it is fingers crossed, because we've got 8 weeks of hard work, but I think we're closer than ever to going unconditional by April.
Thank you. So on completion, after all the investment that's been made in it, will be wholly owned by Plymouth Council?
So that will be determined by some of the grant funding conditions for Homes England, but certainly at the moment we would retain the freehold. That is currently the intention, but that will depend to some extent on the housing developer that we bring forward and the relationship we have with them. But by taking the building back, what we're doing is we're getting control. And I think if you're going to put 40 million of public money in, and it's a very modest amount from the local authority. I mean, this is mostly grant funding. I think the councils, I've got the numbers in my pad, it's about 5 million I think we're in for, but the vast majority of it is assembled from grant funding. But if we're going to put that much grant funding, we want to control the outcome, we want the upside, we want the development profit, and that's why we're doing what we're doing.
Thank you. Okay with that, Councillor Nate? Okay, thank you. Councillor Freeman, please.
Sorry, just turning to the right pages here. Can I ask, this may be appropriate for Tracy, if you don't mind, staff vacancies? Because there's been a lot of information in the pack that we had today that was related to staff. Can I ask, do you know roughly how many vacancies we carry at the moment? But also, because of the vacancy freeze that there has been and where jobs have been looked at on a case-by-case basis for recruiting to, the outward ripple effects of a vacancy freeze, I know, can mean additional stress and pressures onto staff that are in post, which can then in turn have a knock-on effect to staff sickness rates and so on. So I did bring it up at the previous scrutiny panel about there wasn't anything to do with vacancy freeze and things associated with it in the risk register. And I think it might have been David that said it would come under the operational risk side of things, but I don't see it in that either. Is that something that needs to be looked at? Does that come under a recommendation? I'm not sure, looking at everyone else for guidance here. So thank you.
That's fine. If I start off on that one, in terms of the actual number, I can't tell you what the actual number is today. We've got about 11% turnover of staffing at the moment. That is higher than it's been in previous years. The whole of local government is going through quite a substantial turnover as people are inevitably ageing workforce, people are retiring, and the job market is very tight. People can leave, I've said this many times, people can leave a job on a Friday, they are walking into a job on a Monday, and so very much is a very, very tight labour market. And there are a shortage of many professions within the market. So we're really keen to grow our apprentices, and help them have their careers with us and develop and hopefully flourish in those careers. In terms of a staffing freeze, what we've done at CMT, at the corporate management team and the senior leadership team, the wider with the wider service directors, what we're saying is actually, although we're saying please don't recruit if you don't have to recruit, and that is to make sure that in year we are just squeezing on our budgets as best we can, knowing that some service areas have got significant pressures and the costs are increasing. But what we're not doing is having a judgely huddle, as we've done many years ago. We used to have a judgely huddle on I can't remember what day of the week it was. People have to present their case and say whether they want to recruit for a particular post. That is not happening at a corporate management level. And the reason for that is because service directors and the strategic directors know their directorates. They know where they might be able to hold a vacancy, where they might be able to, where they really will need to fill a vacancy. So we're looking, everybody is working to the same criteria that we will hold whatever we can, but where we need to make that investment, we will also do that. But sometimes in saying, let's fill a post, really doesn't mean we fill that post because of that shortage of staff. I'm really, really conscious of the pressures that puts on other members of the team when we have those vacancies, and the way in which the teams work together, they come together. I couldn't ask more of the people who work for this council. They are so passionate, so dedicated to the work delivery, but there is no easy solution. One of the things that we are looking at the moment is how we use what we call intelligent automation, how we're starting to think about AI, and that isn't directly to say, well, actually, you know, we're going to replace that person with a machine by any stretch of the imagination. What it's to do is to help us where we have got big vacancies, and if we can use some of that technology to assist so that people can do other things, maybe stop not always crunching the numbers, but analyse the data. So we're very much at the start of the journey of that, and we're learning from what other councils do in that space as well. And that's why I'll always say that we want people to come work for the council. We want them to have a job here. We want them to have a career here. They won't necessarily tomorrow do the job we ask them to do today, because our jobs are changing. The way in which the whole workplace changes, both for local government but the wider job market, means that the work that we're doing to really think about job enrichment, how we design jobs for the future is really important. And I know Chris Squire, I'm sure, will be with you and can go into that in a little bit more detail.
Thank you, Tracy, and that could well come up in session 2 today as well. And can I just ask, does that 11% turnover include people who might move from one department to another department, or is it in and out of the council payroll?
I will double check. I think it's in and out, rather than, but I will double check on those numbers, and we'll come back to you on that.
Okay, because we have seen successful movement of people between departments, so they can, you know, cross-fertilise their skills and so on, and that's
absolutely. And I think that's one of the differences now to 10, 15 years ago is very much thinking about what skills does somebody have. You know, technical knowledge, absolutely, for certain jobs you absolutely need that technical knowledge, but actually the skills that people have are often transferable around the council, and you'll have seen that where people will pop up in a different department because they have the skills that we need for that particular job.
Thank you. Councillor Riley.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really sorry if I'm going over something that's already been said, because I struggled to hear something over there earlier. But mine is, Tudor, to yourself, I think, about devolution. What is our role, what is Plymouth's role regionally with respect to economy, but also how would devolution impact, how might we be impacted as a city? Thank you.
It's a very interesting time for us, Councillor Riley, if I could say. I mean, I think it was last week I said I had 17 meetings about devolution. Because not only am I working with existing leaders, because there are elections in Cornwall and Devon this year, I'm working with potential leaders of both of those organisations. I'm also working with a number of council leaders who in a year or two's time won't be councillor leaders, nothing to do with them, but their councils are disappearing through local government reorganisation. So there's a huge amount of flux down our way. Don't forget, in the southwest, there are only 2 counties that are not unitised, fully unitised. That's Gloucester and Gloucestershire and us, down in Devon. Everybody else has got a council that's unitary. So the government are trying to simplify local government, the pattern of local government. And then on top of that, there's the devolution piece. So what the cunning plan is to have large areas of the country with what they're calling strategic mayors, okay? So if you know from the north of England, most of the north, it's got 11, I think there's 11 of these in the country at the moment. East Midlands have got one, West Midlands have got one, Greater Manchester's got one, Merseyside's got one, or Liverpool City region, I should say. And then you've got the North East has got one as well. I mean, apart from Andy Burnham, I mean, you'd be struggling to remember what these people's names are. But in their locality, they make a lot of weather. What's really important, though, is where it leads. So those strategic areas will have those elected mayors will then become part of a thing called the Committee of Nations and Regions. So what the government is planning to do is to have regular meetings with all those strategic mayors and the leader of the Scottish leader and the Welsh Assembly leader. And then there'll be other meetings just of the strategic mayoral leaders, and there'll be other meetings just of those nations. But the point is, it's the voices, there'll be less of them, so it'll be easier to hear the priorities and needs and desires of those regions. At the moment, to get your voice heard in government is quite tortuous, I would say. And if you just think about how many council areas we've got down with us. So the opportunity of being able to advocate in a strategic space is something that the southwest of England has long needed. It's why in the north there's huge sums of money going in for transport infrastructure, for example. It's why there's huge sums of money going on in the Midlands for the same reason. Why is there none of that money coming down here? Because we don't speak with one voice on the priorities. We have little goes at it, like the Peninsula Rail Partnership, for example, but it doesn't control any money. Whereas if we get this devolved stuff, instead of Westminster running us, we get the money and the authority and the power to do our own thing down here. But, and this is really important because this is where people are making mischief, I think, is Plymouth Council would still exist. Cornwall Council would still exist. Whatever happens in local government, Exeter maybe, Torquay, they'll still exist as council. We will not be merging into a super council. That isn't on the table. Neither will the strategic mayors be running litter picking, right? Or any of those 300 services that councils currently run. We will still do that. The strategic mayor's job is to formulate grand plans and then talk about them to the government and get the money to do it. That's what it's all about. And somebody who's been bashing my head against a brick wall with Westminster for decades now. The opportunity for us to be in the tent, making the weather, right, is such an offer. The alternative, let me be absolutely clear what the alternative is to have Westminster continuing to rule us. Who on earth wants that? Unless that's your comfort zone. Unless you prefer to whine and whinge that nothing ever happens down here. If that's your happy place, then fill your boots. But if you want change, if you have a desire to start making real waves here for us to fulfill our potential, then you have to support the idea of a strategic authority for this part of the world. I hope that answers your question.
It perfectly answered my question. It's quite inspiring, actually. Thank you, Judah. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you. We have 3 minutes for 2 questions. And first one is from Councillor Ricketts, please.
Thank you. I think Judah's very good at putting his views forward. I think that isn't necessarily the case on some of his points. We'll see how the white paper progresses, but ultimately Plymouth will lose powers any way you slice it. So on a secondary point, are we planning to sell off any of our council assets in the next 12 to 18 months?
Well, yes, I should think we are. I mean, that's what we do. We buy and sell land, we buy and sell property. We've got a fairly dynamic group of officers who are making money for the council all the time. The other thing we do, of course, is not hang on to stuff just for the sake of it. Because actually, you know, empty buildings cost the council money but provide no wealth or income to us. So it's sensible that we're constantly reviewing our estate and disposing and acquiring as to meet our objectives.
Which council assets in question are you thinking about? It's just, we spoke about the staffing situation, and I think it's really important that especially young people coming in to work for a local authority aren't sat in their bedroom, and they actually get all the support and guidance from senior staff. So getting that balance right is absolutely key when we're thinking about selling off office space and important assets.
If you're talking about working from home, which I think you are, I'm going to let Tracy answer that as the head of paid service, okay?
Thank you. So you'll be aware that Midland House is now empty, and so there's an asset that we don't feel we need anymore. We've got accommodation for staff at Crown Hill Court. There's a lot of accommodation there and a lot of accommodation in Ballard House, and of course Prince Rock Depot has got accommodation. The review on hybrid working, the ways of what we call our ways of working, is a programme as part of our transformation and looks at the amount of office accommodation we need for the future and how we move forward. And one of the things we will be doing is having that conversation with our staff about what we need for the future. And very often, and this is a balance, because what works for one member of staff in a very tight labour market where they don't have to work for us, they can work for somebody else, may not actually suit another member of staff, and particularly some of those newer members of staff. So we'll be doing that within our service directorates, because actually in being able to have those conversations around what works best for the future, again, it's that at that level. So you've heard me say consistency, not uniformity. What we're not having is stand by your beds and everybody come in on particular days of the week, because actually the other thing to say is at least 50% of our staff don't work from home because they are out and about in this city doing things. So we are a very diverse organisation, and making sure that we have the right arrangements that support our staff, make sure that we are supporting and working really closely with our customers, with our partners in the city. It's not a uniform solution to that.
Thank you. Councillor Ricketts, are you okay for the response? Can I ask a supplementary as well, in terms of asset management plan? Is there an up-to-date asset management plan, and how often is it reviewed?
Thank you, Chair. You're harking back to a previous meeting, I think, so you know the answer to this one, which is the last time we published an asset management plan was something like 2016. And I can go through all the reasons why we try to refresh every 4 years or so and keep it up to date, but with COVID, etc., that never happened. So we find ourselves in a position. That said, we might not have an overarching plan, but we certainly have sort of individual for different asset classes. So if we took ICT as an example, there's a plan around what we need and what we're doing with that one. Highways might be another big example where we've got a separate plan. What we're developing at the moment, and certainly will be finishing fairly soon, is pulling all those together into an overarching plan, which will then feed into some of the conversations that Councillor Ricketts is asking about surplus property, etc. So it's in development at the moment.
So at the minute, is it consistent? Is each plan consistent with each other? You know, going back to what Tracy said about consistent practice in terms of employment. So are they managed in the same relevant criteria?
I think my response to that would be they fulfil the task that they're trying to fulfil, but there is a read across through those. As people would know, well, yes, Tracy's mentioned the accommodation framework, which is another big one. But during the last 12 months, we did have a sit for review of our governance, and they took, that was one of their first questions as well, Chair, can I see your asset management plan? And we gave the same response, and they were quite content, I think is the word, that what we are doing to pull the other plans together is the right thing to do.
Thank you. So that work is underway. Are you content? It doesn't need to be a recommendation from this board? Because
I'm quite happy for a recommendation to
ensure
expedite that
is-
or to bring it
goes
back
ahead.
to scrutiny to have a look at. So
Okay. Is that okay? Okay. Can I thank you, Councillor Ricketts, because you also took Miss Councillor Allison's question. So thank you very much. So that's given us an extra bit of playtime than we thought we were going to have. Questions, but I want to thank you for asking the questions, but particularly thank you for being in the firing line and responding to them and clarifying information here and giving us food for thought for recommendations to move forward. So thank you all officers, all elected members who've been in that role today. Thank you very much. I will just stay here now and just go through a couple of recommendations and then we'll have a break. Sin, you got your hand up. That's okay. Go for a comfort break now. Oh.
Come back at 20 to 12.
We'll come back at 20 to 12. We'll have the break now. Well, it's welcome to session 2 of the budget scrutiny. 1 down, 4 to go, and with a sleep in between. But we had a good first session, and so let's hope the second session, I'm sure it will be, no pressure, will be just as good as the first one. This focuses on departments 3 cabinet colleagues are leading: housing, cooperative development and communities, led by Chris Penberthy, cabinet member; customer services, sport, leisure, human resources and organisational development, and that's the short title by Councillor Sue Dan; community